About 10 days ago, there was a very interesting interview in Asahi, which is Japan's second largest newspaper, widely read. And the very distinguished chief editor, Mr. Funabashi, interviewed Wang Jise, who is one of the leading experts, I think, on international relations in China. And he's somebody who has a well-deserved, he's not only an expert, but he has a well-deserved reputation for speaking his mind, pretty frankly, which makes him fairly unusual. And so this is very interesting interview. And Wang says about Sino-Japanese relations, we really want Japan to be economically advanced so we can make money with it. And at the same time, we don't want Japan to be armed with nuclear weapons or to have a rapid expansion of naval power because we have some problems with Japan in security terms. It's an exact quote. And then he adds, this kind of complexity and ambivalence will last almost forever. So if you look carefully at what Wang is saying here, he's saying that China, and he talks to power in China, so he's not really expressing his own opinion here. He's expressing what he feels they think. China wants a Japan that's essentially an economic colony of China and a military toothless one as well. Okay? Now, I think very few Japanese would deny that their economy is very much linked to China. Most of Japan's prosperity over the last 2 decades can be linked with trade with China. The Japanese refer to this. I don't know if they have read E.H. Carr's book, but they refer to it as the 20 years economic crisis. And anyway, so the Japanese know that trade with China is important to the continued prosperity of Japan. I am told that fashionable Ginza shops are filled with Chinese customers. I do not shop in fashionable Ginza shops. And meanwhile, Japanese are buying cheaper Chinese-made clothes at places like Uniqlo, where I have been. And for the past year or two, sales in China have been the major source of profit for Japanese automakers. So all of those militate toward, okay, trade with China is important. Now, this economic dependence makes Japan, a lot of Japanese, nervous, especially when they see China developing militarily, and they are still concerned by Article 9 in their constitution. And Wang seems to, some of them think this is a good thing, some of them think it's a bad thing, but there's quite a bit of nervousness about it. Now, Wang seems to anticipate this, and he says later in the interview, China is growing up with a large naval power. I think it is natural that some Japanese would say they should do something to counter or balance off Chinese power. As an analyst, I don't have any problem with that, although saying this is not very good for public relations. And I think you can see where he gets his reputation for being outspoken there. Now, Wang doesn't go into any detail about this, but there have been a lot of examples of tension in recent years. There's been no repetition of those spring 2005 riots when thousands of Chinese took to the streets to protest an accumulation of grievances, the history books, the territorial claims, the shrine visits, and Japan's bid for a permanent seat on the UN Security Council, which the Chinese don't like, many of them. Now, some of these grievances have been quiescent. Recently, the history book issue hasn't been raised. None of the last 5 prime ministers has visited the Yasukuni Shrine while in office. Some of them play games. One of them sent a very expensive masasaki on the I think it was August the 15th. But anyhow, and Japan hasn't recently raised strongly its desire to be for a permanent seat on the Security Council. But judging by a lot of small incidents that have taken place from time to time, most of which do not seem to get noticed in the American press, the animosity hasn't gone away. In October of 2008, at a university in Shanghai, there was a nasty brawl. Now, on the one hand, this is just okay, some drunken students getting into a fight. It happens. On the other hand, if you listen to what the Chinese students are calling the Japanese, it's like, wow, back to the 19th century again. And this is all on the blogs. There's a wonder, China Smack had a wonderful series, but they're calling them the little yellow dwarfs and those little Japanese and really nasty. A couple of things I won't repeat here. And another thing you saw in the Honda strike 10 days, 2 weeks ago in the Pearl River area, so in other words, a whole different place, the workers were shouting why are you police supporting these Japanese against us Chinese? Now, obviously, the police did not see themselves supporting the Japanese against the Chinese, but they were supporting the owners versus the workers. So there's a racial, I don't know if racial is the right word, it's the word they use, but to me they're the same race. But anyway, racial overtones in there that really don't belong. And then again, about, a month ago now, there was a very testy exchange between the Japanese Foreign Minister Okada and his opposite number, Yang Jiechi, over nuclear disarmament and naval maneuvers. And a lovely cartoon in the Japan Times of Mr. Yang blowing his stack with a big mushroom cloud over his head. And the Financial Times correspondent said, in her very British way, these frictions highlight the difficulties facing efforts by the DPJ to establish a more constructive relationship with Japan's nearest neighbor. And Hatoyama really did try hard, and less than satisfactory results. There was a recent, and this is like watching deja vu all over again. Every year or so, there's this new effort to write a common history of the World War II, and every year it falls absolutely flat. And the newspapers in this case went to great lengths to try to say, well, they did agree on something this time, but it wasn't really anything very important. I can talk about that in the future, but anyway. There was also another effort, deja vu all over and over, I guess over a cube or something like that, on solving territorial issues. Now, interestingly, it was popular when Koizumi was in office to blame Koizumi. Koizumi did have some problems with the Chinese as Chinese, and so people would say, well, he's leaving office and things are going to be better. That was in 2006. There have been 5 prime ministers since then. The issues have, none of them, been solved. I would say they've been soothed. Khan is still an unknown. He at first announced that his first trip abroad would be to China, as I believe actually Asso's definitely was. Yes, it was. It was Asso. And this would be a break with immense symbolism, since Japanese prime ministers' first visits abroad have usually been to the United States, and the Japanese are people very keenly attuned to symbolism, as in fact the Chinese. Now, what many Japanese have been saying is that it was foolish of Hatoyama to pick a fight with the United States over the bases issue. Quarrels with the United States seem to be regarded, I would say, as more of a dispute within the family. And the ones with China are definitely an external dispute. Now, at bottom, this is my conclusion. At bottom, I think there are 3 major factors. One is a long history of antagonism, long predating World War II. And I am not talking about 1894-95. I am talking about the 7th century. And now, the second factor is a Japan that feels it's declining, but it's economically tied to China, and a China that feels it's rising, combined with a certain amount of uneasiness. I don't have a chance to talk about whether this momentum can be kept up. But just briefly, you can see in the Chinese press, article after article after article, are we going to be like Japan? Is the bubble going to burst? And the third factor is some schadenfreude that the Japanese very much resent. In other words, that this, poor little aging Japan, much breastfeeding sort of thing, aren't we great? So I would agree with Wang Ji. So the tensions are going to be around for a long, long, long time, and we shouldn't expect confidence-building measures to do more than temporarily soothe them. Now, meanwhile, Japan, I think, is trying to steer a path between being a little bit more assertive from the U.S. and wanting at the same time protection from China, which is a devilishly difficult thing to do. And I think the tensions are going to remain. There's a reasonable expectation that they can be managed, but what I would like to conclude with is I think this is actually Japan-China relations are a special case of Eli's paper about what's going to keep China from rising. And this is going to be a significant deterrent.